Hey everyone, welcome to this edition of the Microsoft Security Insights Show. It is July 26, 2023. Hello, Brody. Hello, Rod Trent.
Good day. Good day.
I'm a Barbie girl in a Barbie world.
I was going to tell you guys, I was there Friday night. It was a theater full of women all dressed in pink. It was
nice.
a good time.
So tell me about the movie. What was the redeeming quote? What was this movie? What's the message?
Honestly,
what are the key takeaways?
It's kind of cute. Is like the Barbies in their world think that they've been promoting feminism and women to become astronauts and Supreme Court justices. And when Barbie, gets out, she comes out into the real world and realizes that, 14-year-old girls blame her for their eating disorder.
Oh my
That's awesome. I mean, not that dramatic, but
okay.
But it's she comes into the real world and she's never heard of the patriarchy, right? And so it's just sort of a story about how
that's kind of cool.
Yeah, what they meant for Barbie to do and what Barbie did were not always,
So it's not like the Toy Story Barbie where it's still Barbie. Yeah. Okay. All right. So there's a story there. So I'll watch it eventually. I'm reluctant to go to the movie theater at any time these days for whatever reason. I just got out of the habit long ago. I stream every streaming service there is. So yeah, I'll catch it eventually.
You gotta go to the adult movie theaters. Do you guys have those where you go in and there's no kids and you get
not that kind of adult theater?
Yeah.
Oh yes, I'm describing it. Hold on, I'm describing, and there's there's reclining love seats, and they bring alcohol and dinner to you. Yes. Okay. Yes, that type of.
All drinking our pink martinis.
There's that secret menu with the secret room. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's gonna get me in trouble.
Not the VIP room, but Rob. But see, at my family, we always love going to the movies. What I like about going to the movie, which is also the bad part about going to the movie, which is that communal experience. Like when 100 people are laughing together or jumping at the same time. That's just something. I mean, you can't pause and go to the bathroom, but it's sort of that nice communal experience that we don't get that much anymore.
So I think what I used to ruin it for my friends because we would go. Remember the old Police Academy movies? There's like 100 of them, I think, 100 different versions. But we would go to the theater, big theater. Police Academy opened up in this huge theater. The first one, I was sitting there with my friends. It's one of those theaters where there's so many people clap when things happen on the screen. It's just so annoying. So I used to sit there and I would do the clapping. I would start the clapping just to annoy my friends because they hated it. So.
Just trolling.
Yeah, it's good time.
Clapping.
And I would clap at the wrong times. Something.
Oh my God, Rod.
Oh yeah.
You're such a joy, Rod. Such a joy.
Yeah. So I guess we should go around the table, see what we've all been up to or what we have coming up. So Andrew, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I just put in my my notes today, what's up with WSUS? I just feel like this is an important thing for everyone to know. Yes, we should say Edward is off. For those who are missing Edward's dulcet tones, it is the 10th anniversary of the not-for-profit that he runs, which is called Black Men Run. And so he's off helping to celebrate that, talking to the press and stuff today. He'll be back next week. But back to, we're changing the way that if you're using WSUS for patching, hopefully a lot of y'all are using SCCM, so you're not necessarily using WSUS, but if you are, we're changing the way that we import updates into the WSUS update catalog. I will post the link in the notes because I would hate for anybody to fall behind on patching, which is like my pet project. Patches and patching, passwords and patching, the forgotten building blocks of enterprise security, in my opinion.
Yeah, let me, you might pass that along. I'll put it in the show notes as well.
Okay.
Let me see that there. Yeah, I didn't know things were changing. That's interesting. So it's been a while since I've dealt in that realm of patching. Patching obviously is like the first step to being secure. People kind of forget that step, right?
Yep. They want all the shiny new stuff when doing all the old boring stuff can be a huge help.
So what's the difference between what we're promoting now from a patching perspective and auto patch, because I have a couple really good friends who are PMs in the auto patch, working with auto patch. You know the difference there, or how that kind of fits together?
Well, all of the auto patch stuff, as far as I know, is InTune based, right? So you're using InTune to manage your devices, and with that, that gets rid of totally the need for IIS for almost anyone who's running WSUS. You're also an IIS admin, whether you want to be or not. So gets rid of that need for IIS. But if you're not, if you're not running Intune, if you're not running SCCM, if you're a small shop, you might still be running an IIS server running WSUS. It's still viable. It's a good solution for those who need it. Except if you can't afford, a device management solution like Intune or SCCM, it's still out there for you. But we'd love to get you on a modern management system.
Awesome. Onward and upward always, I guess, right? So that's good. Anything else?
No, that's the excitement around here.
You're not doing anything other than Barbie and WSUS. That's it.
I guess I have to go see Oppenheimer this weekend so I can have the full Barbieheimer experience, and I can report back on that next week. But
you should have just jumped theaters after Barbie was done. Just go to the theater across the hall.
Back.
Yeah,
love it.
I know lots of people did. Lots of people did. So
they do. They do, but yeah, we used to do that all the time. We would go to a movie, we'd pay for it, think it's going to be great because they hyped it up on television, and it sucked. And we're like, what did we just watch? So we just go across the hall and get our money's worth.
Can't do that anymore, though, because all the seats are assigned.
Yeah, I was going to say.
True.
They're on to you, Rod.
Huh?
They are on to you. And
yeah, I guess so. Yeah. I'm the reason for that, by the way, just so you know.
Yes. Yeah.
Brody, how about yourself? You are back after a brief hiatus.
I'm back after a brief hiatus. It's
good.
good.
A new haircut.
Thank you. Got a haircut. Yeah, I got a new barber. He's great. We were talking about that quick in the pre-show. He's trying to convince me to get onto Diablo 4 like all my other friends. I'm like,
yeah,
it's sunny outside, and I like garden and golfing and biking, so I'm not going to do that. And I like my wrists. I don't like carpal tunnel. I remember the Diablo 2 days. I get it, but yeah, things are good. I'm working on a super important project, and it's extremely, what's the word? I'm learning a lot. I'm getting to work with some colleagues in my consulting area in the security service line, whom I've not worked with before. So I'm in a segment in Microsoft called the security service line. We're actually called cyber ops, security, cyber ops resilience. And we are distributed across North America and a little bit in South America. And I have never actually worked with any of my colleagues in person before. So this was an opportunity to do that. And I'm working with a great team, learning a ton, and it's been really interesting. I've been getting myself reacquainted with the Bell Lapadula Tier 0, 1, and 2 model. That is something that was in my CISSP exam.
I think you're kind of giving away some things there.
Yeah, it's not saying I'm giving it away. I'm just saying it's important to understand tiering in your infrastructure. It's important to understand that.
Absolutely.
So it's great. It's made me really busy because I've had to juggle projects, but I've got great teams on all my projects, and everybody's figuring it out. And so life's good. Can't complain. Sun is shining. Things are good. Happy to be back. Appreciate everybody putting up with without me for a week. And it's too bad Edward's not here, because I did want to give him a hard time. I was watching the replay of the previous show, and how he immediately said to the guest, I think I know you from somewhere. It's like, class.
It was CrowdSec.
Yeah, it's CrowdSec. And I took.
He had to remind the guy that he had actually met him, though.
Right. Yeah. Edward's forgettable. That's fair. The new Brody thing. I took that seriously, and I cried for 24 hours straight. But I'm okay now.
Yeah.
Talk to my therapist.
Yeah,
it is.
A temporary Brody.
Temporary. Thank you.
There's no substitute. Sorry.
I'm trying to be Microsoft's mascot per your call out there, Rod. Yeah, it's all good.
Right.
But yeah, that's all for me. Life's busy, but it's good. Busy is good. Learning a ton. Learning is important. I never want to get complacent. Getting complacent sucks. So I'm happy this came up. Probably this is going to start a whole flurry of new things for me in my career. So I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So before we introduce or reintroduce our guest here in a little bit, Chris is with us tonight. He's been here before, but he has some really cool extra things, some new things with what he wowed us with before. So we'll take a look at that here very shortly. But from my perspective, what am I doing? I had planned on taking the AI exams this week, right? That
Because
didn't
you've
work
got all
out.
the answers.
ChatGPT has all the answers. So I had planned on doing that this week. I ran out of time, so I'm gonna do that next week. I'm still working on that. I'm just gonna take them straight out of the gate. I'm not even gonna study, just to see what happens.
Yeah, that's what I always do, just to see if I pass. Great. If I don't, I know what's on the test for next time.
Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
It's easy when it's free. Yeah.
Yeah, we're lucky.
I can literally take the content from Learn and dump it into my Rod bot, and it's going to have all the answers anyway. So anyway, just I throw it out there. I have to tomorrow. So after the show tonight, I have to pack. Tomorrow I'm headed to Denver. Friday we're having a day of AI, or I've seen the other sessions. It's literally a day of copilots. It's all the copilots. So talking to customers and partners in Denver on Friday, but I'm a little bit upset about it because I looked at the weather forecast, right? I'm thinking I'm in Ohio today. I got my outside run as normal, but it was, oh my goodness. Normally, I'm a finely tuned machine. When it takes me at least a mile or a mile and a half sometimes to even start sweating. But today it was like 150 feet. I'm like, oh my goodness, it's so hot and humid. Then I looked at Denver's forecast. I'm thinking I'm going to get a reprieve in Denver. Nope, it's going to be hotter in Denver than it is in Ohio when I'm there. So I'm a little upset.
And you're at a higher elevation, so there's less oxygen.
Less oxygen and closer to the sun. I feel a little bit like Icarus.
Yeah, that's so, there you go.
Yeah. But that's it for me. I think that's all I have right now. Well, I actually, good friend of mine, announced today, if you saw it on Twitter, LinkedIn, I think there was even some stuff on Facebook. There was some announcements about Microsoft Ignite. Microsoft Ignite will be an in-person hybrid event this year as well. In November, there will actually be a pre-day this year. So all-day workshops before Ignite, and there's an entire, well, I can't talk about that yet. But there will be a pre-day. So there'll be all-day workshops, and more of that information will be coming out as soon as it's available. But Ignite is going to be super awesome this year. The in-person event's going to be great.
Can't wait for you to get us all tickets. We appreciate that, Rod.
So,
we can take that offline, but
we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Think about your friends.
I've already alluded to that. I don't know if you caught that, Brody, while you were away on your. Okay, we'll talk about that later.
I did not catch
that.
Right. Okay.
But we do have a guest tonight. Brody, would you like to introduce our guest? Yeah, since you've been gone. Plus, I think you may have been the last person to talk to Chris.
We got Chris. Chris is
going, everyone?
Chris from Canada. Chris is going to show us all the goodness on SOCGPT. If you missed
Canada's really small, so you're probably like neighbors.
Super small. Yeah, there's like only about 12 of us up here
I'm the
in
only
Canada.
Chris in Canada.
Yeah, and he is the only Chris in Canada. Crazy how that worked out, Chris?
Yep.
But yeah, when we're not, policing our igloo farms on moose back, we also have smart people developing amazing generative AI security solutions, and Chris is one of those individuals. So if you missed our first episode with Mr. Stelzer, then you missed out, because he basically showed us the power of generative AI and security before this whole Copilot thing happened right?
You know what?
Now,
I have to laugh because well, I haven't actually been in public presenting this before. What you saw was the internal call we did inside of Microsoft. I've never talked about this. No, we didn't. The last time I was on the pod was about managed identities, way before we even got into the generative AI space. So no one's really seen this from a video demo perspective, other than you guys internally.
So we're giving away some of our secrets.
Yeah.
Yes, we have internal calls. Yes, super secret. Well, Chris, all right, fine, Chris. Like, show us what you got. Introduce yourself, and let's get on this. Never mind what I said.
Yeah, I mean, let's get into it, right? So just bring my screen share up, and you know, we'll talk about it, and I'll talk through it. And you know, I've always been fascinated with generative AI. As soon as these things came out, you know, as soon as the APIs hit, I was like, how can we start using logic apps, functions, Python, whatever we can to interact with this data? And I want everybody to go back to, I think it was episode 127 when you had Andrea talking a lot about the Sentinel Triage Assistant. And I think that's where everybody has to start when talking about kind of where can a lot of these generative models help. Episode 127, for sure, go back, take a look at it. Andrea goes through a deep dive of what's called the Sentinel Triage Assistant, where we can gather evidence pertaining to incidents inside of Sentinel. And, you know, it does a wealth of gathering of information, things like priority, matching threat intelligence details, related alerts, related devices. It does an amazing job, but the amount of information that the Sentinel Triage Assistant gathers, it absolutely can be daunting, right? It's a lot of data. So as soon as these OpenAI models came out, I started to say, hey, can we feed Sentinel as much of that triage data as possible and allow us to start asking questions, right? We've got all the related users, devices, TI details, and everything. Let's ask it some questions about that data and see how it responds. So combining the power of the Sentinel Triage Assistant with generative AI is really the bread and butter of this solution. So we really can't do what I'm about to show you without the Sentinel Triage Assistant today. I'll pause. Anybody, any questions right now from the team?
Well, thanks for reminding everybody to definitely check out that stat episode because Andrea and her colleague did an amazing job. And yeah, I never knew that was a capability before. I know you've built upon this. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
So the idea is like we let the Sentinel Triage Assistant do its gathering. And what we're actually working on now is a preview of a GPT module directly built into Stat. And I can show you it. It's in preview right now. Very, very, very cool. We're just kind of working on exactly what it should be like because, you know, what I developed was completely custom API calls. So if we can get this in Stat, so you guys can all just use it very, very quickly, it's going to be a really, really good thing. So the first thing I recommend everybody do is go look at the API schema for ChatGPT, whether it's in Azure OpenAI or whether you go to the public OpenAI website. Just learn how to make an API call with the schema that is presented. So I've got a lot of these API calls available on Postman. You can just visit my Postman workspace. I have all of these published. But ultimately, the idea is we have to tell the system how it's going to behave. So on my screen, you can see here that I've basically created a system message that tells the model, this is how you're going to behave. And it says, hey, you're going to be a helpful security operations analyst that uses security tech like Sentinel, Defender for Cloud, to help respond and investigate to an incident. We're going to give you a bunch of information about a specific incident, and we want you to help formulate a response plan. So this, when we talk about things like prompt engineering, you've got to tweak this as much as possible. I'm no expert in prompt engineering, but I think tweaking this to state exactly how you want the output to behave is going to be your best bet for adapting how this output actually works. And one thing that we're working with in the Sentinel Triage Assistant module is obviously things like risk scoring. So like if an incident was scored really high, we might want the model to say, hey, this is more than likely a true positive because its score is above 100. I know, Andrea, you talked a lot about scores in the Sentinel Triage Assistant, but what if it was below a 10? We might tell the model that, hey, we recommend that this might be a false positive. So the model can actually change the way it responds by introducing a lot of this additional data. And the way that we add all of this additional data is through what we call these assistant messages. So these assistant messages are just supporting evidence. So we've told the model what it's going to be, and the assistant messages are basically like, here's some supporting data before I even get to my question. And this supporting data is ultimately data extracted from the Sentinel Triage Assistant. I've literally just taken raw data from Stat and added it as assistant messages. Simple things like the title, description are pretty common, but We get more detail like MITRE techniques, related devices, matching threat intelligence addresses, right? All of the additional supporting evidence pertaining to an incident, we can just include in assistant messages. And you can have as many assistant messages as you want. And this really helps the model draw upon a lot of helpful information. So when I ask it a question about what do you know about the user, it can look at the user information from the Sentinel Triage Assistant and pull that data back and basically just allow me to respond to it. So it's the system message, it's all the assistant messages, and then last but not least, it's the question. What do we want the model to do, and how do we want it to respond? And I think first off, a lot of customers want a response plan. They want a detailed summary of everything we know about that incident, all the related evidence, and give it to me over a few paragraphs, detail all the related information, the devices, the alerts, the threat intelligence indicators, the IP addresses, everything you think is relevant about this incident, just summarize it in a paragraph for me. And we can just make changes to this user message anytime we want to ask it a different question. And I'll show this in a demo. So what we're working on in the Sentinel Triage Assistant is basically when you download and install it, it comes with a sample playbook that you can take a look at. And it looks very similar to this. It's like anytime an incident is created in Sentinel, go ahead and run all of the stat modules, gather threat intel details, related alerts, defender for endpoint data. All those modules run. And then what we're creating in the Sentinel Triage Assistant is this GPT module. It'll actually just be a brand new module in the stat pack called the GPT module. And all you do is give this GPT module the data from the other modules. I'm giving it the related alerts, I'm giving it the base data, I'm giving it threat intelligence details, I'm giving it, the risk scoring, I'm giving it the results of a KQL query, and then your question down below. So when we release this, this will essentially be how it's going to work in the Sentinel Triage Assistant. Very easy. You just pass it the data in from stat and then go ahead and ask your question. And what I'm hopefully going to do is release a sample playbook that allows you to not just generate a response plan, but use an interactive chat. So the way that we can sort of chat with this model, rather than obviously producing a summary is okay, but I want to give a security analyst the ability to talk about this incident. What do you know about the users? What do you know about the computers? All this really is doing is using what's called an adaptive card in Teams. So what we can basically do is take the incident details, post an adaptive card to Teams, but do this in a loop. Do this over and over and over again. So what we're basically going to do and show you the demo is how we're going to be doing this, is basically just compose an adaptive card. And then if they opt to chat with the bot, just go ahead and call the GPT module a second time, but use the question that they've asked in the Teams card. And this way they can type whatever they want in the Teams card and just click OK. And it asks the SOCGPT module to just look at the evidence on the incident and answer that question based on that evidence. So it's just going to basically loop over and over and over again. And this is ultimately how this solution works. So when the solution is deployed, basically what you're left with is an incident basically gets triaged automatically using stat. We make an API call, and I have a really great summary of the incident sitting inside a Teams chat. And this is basically telling me, hey, it looks like somebody has been abusing BitsAdmin on an endpoint. And this is a characteristic incident from Defender. It's telling me, hey, the user involved in the incident is this person who is a SecOps analyst in the security operation department that is registered for MFA and has admin privileges. So it's pulled all of that from nothing but stat. One of the base modules in stat, I think it's the identity protection module. It pulls who the user is, the role, the job title, whether they're registered for MFA. It knows all of that. And I simply included that in an assistant message, and it's able to draw upon that as well. It's telling me that there's a related host. This is the host at which the BitsAdmin abuse is happening on. It talks about the MITRE technique. Remember in my description, I said, make sure you explain what that MITRE technique is. So it explains what T1197 is for that analyst and produces a full detailed response plan. Now, these are hit or miss, obviously, recommending how to respond to an incident. There's hallucinations, they're never entirely correct, but as these models get better, as we train them with best practices, as we seed things like Security Copilot with years and years of incident response technology from our own internal response teams, it'll get way better at producing these things.
Nice.
So this is a really good start, and I'll pause here and let questions come in. You got a question, Andrea? Yeah.
So I have 3 questions, but the first one is, we were all so excited that you were here. You did not introduce yourself. So we have people in the chat being like, who is this guy? What does he do? What's his last name?
I thought that was part of the demo. I thought that was part of the demo.
Yeah. Part of the demo. No, that's fine. We can do an intro. Like, I'm Chris. I'm part of Andrea's team. Actually, I'm a security technical specialist, just supporting kind of anywhere in the Canadian customer region. So really helping customers, deploy and sell Microsoft security products.
Excellent. Second question is, so when you say OpenAI, people are thinking, are we talking Azure OpenAI?
Azure.
Are we talking the real Open? Okay. So, and
everything I've talked about so far can be done exclusively in Azure without your data never leaves, right? For sure.
Okay. Do you want to real quick explain the difference between Azure OpenAI and OpenAI?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, OpenAI is sort of a public space within OpenAI. OpenAI is a company, right? And you have the ability to use things like ChatGPT, which rely on OpenAI's public APIs around ChatGPT. You can provision your own AI space in Azure and get your own instance of OpenAI in Azure that you can have your own API that you can talk to. So all these API calls I'm discussing, they can all be done exclusively in Azure in the data center and region that you provision them in. So your data never leaves Azure, all stays within it. You don't have to worry about dealing with the public ChatGPT APIs.
I think one of the important things to highlight as well is that we don't use customers' data to feed the model, right? The customer's data is the customer's data. Other than that, OpenAI, the public version, they do use that to train their model.
So when I take this triage data and I ask Azure OpenAI to do something with it and answer a question, I'll say that data temporarily is retained for 30 days to do abuse monitoring. You can actually ask Azure, like, hey, I don't want my data retained for any period of time. You can opt out of abuse monitoring if you have a good use case. And basically, as soon as you make an API call, your data is deleted immediately. So we never use your data to train the model. Your data is your data. By default, it gets purged after 30 days, but you can opt out of that abuse monitoring if you do care.
And that's also neat to highlight, is that it's only for the abuse monitoring. Yeah. It's only used for that, for the compliance.
Yep. And I think that's historically that's what ChatGPT is. All it is, if you go to the website, all it's doing is making these API calls over and over. The danger with it is they retain a history of everything you ask and everything it responds. So a lot of the danger with ChatGPT comes like, if your account gets breached or leaked, there's been thousands of ChatGPT accounts found on the dark web. The whole history of everything you've asked and everything it's told you is there in ChatGPT's website. And that history, I think, is far more troublesome than just making an API call and Azure deletes the data immediately, right? So it's a little bit different in terms of that, right?
So here's a funny thing before you carry on. So Friday, this Day of AI thing, I'm doing a bunch of demos. One of the things I want to do is the difference between ChatGPT and Azure OpenAI, that implementation. So I do some silly things sometimes. I had to go back to the public version and make sure my history didn't have something really weird in it.
Yeah.
For that
it's
demo.
Scary.
Yeah.
Interesting. Cool, man.
I do have one more thing. I'm sorry, Brody, you have a question?
No, I'm just kind of filling dead air, and I love this topic, so it's cool. Andrew, keep going.
I was just going to say, so for those who are listening and may not be watching, you mentioned also an interactive Teams card. Do you want to explain what that is?
For sure.
People who don't even have Teams, they may not know what we're talking about.
For sure. So there's this framework called adaptive cards. And adaptive cards are basically, a mechanism for you to design JSON to allow you to basically create and provision cards that dynamically display data. And these cards actually can now, fit into whether it be an email, whether it be a Power App, whether it be a Teams message. They're just ways to create more visual, applications that have, really nice UIs with lots of powerful features in them. So you can actually visit, the adaptivecards.io and the Schema Explorer and browse samples. And actually, they have a really cool designer utility that you can go kind of create your own adaptive card with your own buttons and your own things. That's one way that you can develop adaptive cards. There's lots of other ones out there as well. So they're a really cool solution for creating interactive cards in email or in Teams that allow you to interact with data. And that's exactly what I've done here is I've gathered all that evidence using Stat. I've asked OpenAI to give me a summary, and I've pushed it into a team site using an adaptive card.
Cool. Thank you. Well, then
Yeah.
I will take a question. Andrea, great questions, Andrea. Just killing it today.
Really good.
Yeah. So my good friend Todd Ray, who I love working with, Todd, you're great. Todd's asking for what the cost implications are. And Chris, in our internal call, our first internal call, the joke was it was $1.34 Canadian, which is about 72 cents American. So it's like what is this? Like how much people got to shell out for this? $5, $10?
It is pennies. Like we're talking, if you look at some of the new pricing, they dropped the pricing as well on the new announcement. And it really depends, 75% cost reduction, 25% cost reduction in ChatGPT model that you announced in June. So they're constantly reducing the cost. We're talking, I think it's like, one of these incident summaries might cost me 1/10 of a cent to generate inside of Sentinel. Like it is a rounding error in the grand scheme of Azure infrastructure costs and those types of things. You bet.
Nice. A Canadian rounding error. Thank you.
Yeah, and there, I think that's historically the problem that a lot of people are struggling with is this notion of what they call token limitations. So every time you talk to ChatGPT, there's a limit to how much you can ask and how much it returns. This is a hard limit that OpenAI has configured. Now, obviously, when you move up to GPT-4, the limits increase, but so does the price. Every time you make an API call, it costs you a lot more, but you can use more and more text. So I think as these solutions expand and the token limitation is increased, prices will also increase, but so will capabilities. So what they did is they announced a new 16K model, which basically means that the new version of ChatGPT, which is ChatGPT 16K, basically allows you to use 20 pages of text in a single request. That's a lot. That's a lot of pages. Like you could probably have 100 lines of output in a KQL query, and it would handle it no problem. You ask it a question about a massive KQL output, no problem. So, and this is what we're asking here. That's the price, $0.003 per 1,000 tokens. Think of a token like a word. It's not really a word or a character. It's close to a word. So it is very, very low cost to create and provision and use these features. I don't, cool. Yeah. Very, very cost effective, in other words.
So just as a related note there, I'm looking at mine, looking at cost management, my Azure billing here.
Yeah.
For my resource group, now I do have things like cognitive search working and feeding, right, the data to my AI, but I'm literally paying $1.11 this month for cognitive search.
Yeah, mine's been like $1 or $2, and I triage like hundreds of incidents. I have 50 Microsoft employees in my lab using this solution. I really don't pay much at all. Yeah.
That's really cool. And I just love, by the way, how it was ChatGPT 3.5 Turbo. Reminds me of the old Turbo buttons.
It's always been Turbo, but the 16K is the new model. So now that I have my incident, I'm in a team site. It's a great start, but there's a lot of evidence. Remember, Stat has grabbed a lot of data. What's shown in this little paragraph of a summary is maybe a 10% of the data that this incident has. So if I basically choose to open a private chat with this particular incident, I can click this SOCGPT button. And what basically happens is it sends me an adaptive card directly into a chat. So now I basically have a private chat where I can talk about this incident. And that's all I'm basically doing is the same API call with the same incident data, but I'm simply asking a different question. So somebody's been abusing Bitsadmin. It looks like this Office Chris user, not sure who that is, but I could ask it all kinds of simple questions about this particular user. Maybe I just want to ask it to, summarize the user details. Tell me all you know about the users, because there may be 5 users. Let's just bring forth a summary. So what this is going to do is, again, call that API with all my triage data and try to answer that question based on all the data that I've given it. And it's going to basically run, it's going to go ahead and respond, and it's going to go ahead and return the data in question. Now, occasionally we will get sometimes OpenAI, I'm sure, Rod, you probably had it where OpenAI doesn't respond. There's some type of a delay. Because these services are all in preview, Azure OpenAI is in preview. Occasionally, we'll encounter issues where the API call doesn't make its call in time. So it's basically gonna basically grab those user details and return those user details. We may be stuck in a position where it's thinking about it, but you can see in an example, like specifically, here's exactly what happens when I ask, can you summarize all the user details? And what the model will basically do is return all of the user details. It pulls the username, the UPN, the job title, the department, are they registered for MFA? What's their threat score? What roles are they a part of? You basically name it. It grabs all the evidence pertaining to that incident directly and easily, directly from the data that the Sentinel Triage Assistant is responsible for.
Really cool. And does it have, is it context aware? So can I have follow-up questions without having to restate the entire thing?
Yeah, so it's always contextually aware of the current incident. So the same incident data that's there, it will always be aware of this evidence in this incident. And I think that's historically a bit of a problem, is like, I'm asking it questions about this incident, but what if I decide to ask it a question about something else? In this model, it always will be locked into the context of this particular incident, which can be problematic in some cases, when dealing with incidents. But that's just ultimately how this particular solution works in this particular use case. It's always sort of locked into the incident context.
Cool. Okay.
So,
And stating the obvious, this Security Copilot, other capabilities that have come to light from the community or internal, et cetera. But how has the feedback been from customers or partners that you work with in terms of how they could augment their teams and bring people in maybe at a level that can assist in a higher level of capacity with maybe less education based on these types of response and using real words, real query questions, etc., right, to get maybe other than threat hunting and getting into more complex topics. That was a terrible sentence, but I'm trying to get at, Chris. Thank you.
Yeah,
I think that was Brody's AI was malfunctioning there for a second.
Chris, make up your own question if you need to.
Yeah.
No, I definitely think like we need dreamers in this space. We need people who just like, I think nobody really knows how this is going to drastically help security teams. Like we've seen some glimpses of some cool examples in Security Copilot, but I think we need more people playing with these models, trying out what works, what doesn't work, what's horrible, what's really good. And I think until a lot of SOCs and security teams get these into their hands, I think we might have difficulties really answering that question. But I think as Security Copilot nears, as we get it more integrated, I think we're going to see a lot more capability sort of come out.
Nice. Thank you.
Also, you can see here that it did end up returning that data. More than likely, the API call had a single failure and then retried. Yeah, one retry occurred. And this, again, not my fault. OpenAI is not perfect. Occasionally, API calls will fail. They will time out. It happens from time and time again.
Well,
I upgraded my model.
To its credit, that's APIs in general. That happens across the board.
Yeah. So this return the user details. I mean, I can get even more specific. Like, you might just want to ask it, are the users registered for MFA? Like, these are really common natural language questions. When I'm triaging an incident, I could dig through all the evidence to see, or I could just ask it, are they registered for MFA? Are the devices they're using considered compliant? Are they at risk? What do we know about threat intelligence details? And the list really goes on and on. Here's a really complex example of an incident that has a bunch of IP addresses. This is a brute force attack against my web server. You can see a listing of IPs with matching threat intel. I might want to ask it specifically to summarize all of the threat intelligence details, right? Let me know what you know about the threat intelligence details. So I can say, can you summarize the TI details? What are your thoughts about them? Question mark, and ask it. It's quite fun when you start asking questions like, what should I do next? And it's very, it definitely doesn't really want to respond in a way that could jeopardize your safety, you make a wrong decision, all those types of things. So, basically when I asked it if it was registered for MFA, it just responded with, yep, go ahead, and I'm registered. In this detail about the threat intelligence details, it's basically telling me, yes, all the threat intelligence details that have been involved in the incident have been flagged as potential threats. These IPs have been associated with activities such as brute force, botnet. Based on this information, it is evident that the security incident involves a coordinated and targeted attack on this web server. The presence of botnets and brute force. So it basically looked at all the TI details and told me, all of them are matching botnets and brute forces. There's definitely something going on here.
Yeah, seems like it. Something fishy's going on, Chris, from Canada.
So I want to respond to this is the issue now. And historically, the way this works is, if you've ever tried to ask ChatGPT to do something, like, can you block an IP address? Here's an example. Just ask it, can you block 8.8.8.8? Why you want to block that IP out? But in any case, it's like, I apologize. As an AI language model, I don't have the capability to block or modify IP addresses. IP blocking is blah, 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 network admin. So it's not able to perform any kind of action. Now, this was up until OpenAI released a new feature called function calling. And they snuck this under the radar, but if you start looking at YouTube videos of function calling, developers are freaking out because this will turn OpenAI into Skynet very quickly. We will start seeing all manner of API calls, just grabbing any external data, doing all kinds of dangerous things. Now, to be clear, function calling does not actually reach out and do something. It simply returns what's called JSON code that matches a certain function that you want to do. So if I want to ask it a question like, can you block an IP address and give it that particular IP address, it's going to say, no, I can't do that. In the new model, what we can actually do is define a function. I can actually, in my API call, define a new function called, let's use disable an Azure AD user as an example. This function is called disable an Azure AD user. It will return this function name, and it accepts a user principal name. And this is extremely powerful. This is basically telling the model that when somebody asks to disable a user, I want you to return the user principal name and the function name. So in this case, if this function was part of my API call, and then I go ahead and ask it that question, can you block the IP address so-and-so? Rather than telling me no, guess what it does? It actually says, absolutely, I can do that. It doesn't actually do it, but it returns the block IP as the function name and the IP address. Now, this might sound rudimentary, a simple example, but we can get very, very powerful for these. Like, what if I wanted a function to say, find me the sign-in logs for a user in a specified time and date range from a specified IP? So here's a function called find Azure AD sign-ins for a user IP and date and time range. Now we get really powerful because this function actually returns a from date, a to date, an IP address, and a UPN. So now when I ask it the question, can you, I'll go down here and say like, can you, as an example, can you find me the AAD sign-ins for Office Chris at whatever from June 23rd, 2023, and just run that as an example. So what it's going to do now is it's saying, hey, it looks like this person's looking for the find Azure AD sign-ins function, and it has returned me the UPN, the from date, and the to date. What's really cool is it's actually automatically filled from and to. I've only asked it for June 23rd, but guess what? It auto responded with June 23rd at midnight to June 23rd at 11:59. Very, very cool. And no matter how I ask the question, this might again sound rudimentary, but I could ask it the question, can you, pretty please look for the AAD sign-ins for Office Chris from June 23rd from IP 8.8.8.8. You can mix, it doesn't really matter where you have the IP, the date, the user, it'll pick all of that out and constantly return the same set of values and the same set of parameters in here. So the ability to now do this basically allows you to unlock the capability of running playbooks. So what you can basically do in my solution now is just click the playbook button. So if I wanted to now immediately respond to something like, hey, this IP is definitely, doing a bad thing, let me ask it first, what playbooks can you trigger? And basically it's going to return a function that looks at my documentation, and it's going to return a list of playbooks. And it's going to basically just list all the playbooks out that the model's capable of running. So I have a lot of playbooks configured inside my, basically a really easy get function app that basically just says, depending on what you're looking for, here's all of the functions that I've defined. So it's going to return the function name, and here's all my functions. I've got a bunch of them built in here. This is like my documentation function that returns a bunch of documentation pertaining to all the playbooks that it's capable of running. So in this case, I ask it, what playbooks can you trigger? Sure enough, it goes ahead and returns a list of playbooks. Disable Azure AD user, enable isolate machine, block IP. So I could also ask it like, how do I block an IP address? And it will again, run that function, gather my documentation, and try to answer that question with my documentation. So it's going to look at the documentation. I've got some examples in there, and it's just going to say, in order to block an IP, use the phrase block an IP and give it an IP address. To block an IP address, you can use the block IP address function. Simply provide the IP you want to block, and the function will call upon a playbook to block it for 30 days using Defender for Endpoint. So it even gives me an example in here. Now, the danger of letting a model do an action is very prevalent in their blog article. They always recommend doing some type of approval mechanism, because if I ask it to block this IP, what if it hallucinated some random IP? I'm not going to say it would, but there's a chance that it could. You generally want to have some type of approval mechanism to confirm that it's got the right parameter and it's got the right function. So in this case, I've introduced an approval mechanism. Would you like to block this IP address? I can say approve, and my playbook executes, and this particular playbook runs, and it goes ahead and blocks that IP address. So the ability to very quickly, just use natural language to call upon playbooks, right? Yes, the IP has already been blocked across all hosts using Defender for Endpoint. And if I were to go into MD right now, I'd see that IP address is blocked. Now, you've been able to trigger playbooks from adaptive cards for a while, but using natural language is really powerful because we can have it run. One thing I really like is running KQL queries. What if I wanted it to just look for the sign-in logs for a user of a certain date and time? These are very powerful, right? So what if I basically ask it, can you describe in a few paragraphs the sign-ins for this user on this day? And basically what's going to happen in this particular function is it's going to do just that. It's going to trigger my get AAD sign-ins function just from that natural language. So we can see in here that it's matched to the get AAD sign-ins function. It's run this KQL query as an example. It's run the KQL query automatically and grabbed all the output of the KQL query, passes it back to the model, and tries to answer my question with that particular piece of information. So the question I asked is, can you describe the sign-in logs in a few paragraphs? So instantly it has run a KQL query, retrieved all of the sign-in logs, and then summarized it in a beautiful, beautiful format. Here it says on June 21st, this user had multiple sign-ins from Spain. One occurred through the Azure portal. The user's IP address was so-and-so. The browser used was Edge on Windows 10. The device was signed in using an Azure AD device marked as compliant by the security organizational policies. And this is literally, all this is doing is giving it the output of a KQL query and asking it to describe in a few paragraphs what those results are. So I think I'm never looking at sign-in logs manually ever again. When you stare at a KQL results and go through what each log means, I don't have the time for that. And this capability for really just summarizing, and that's what all these copilots are doing. They're just summarizing large portions of text. Microsoft Copilot, GitHub, Windows, this is what they're really good at. And what's amazing here is I can just modify the question. I asked it for a big summary. What if I just wanted to know what applications were used by this user? I can ask it a completely different question, but it's going to hit the same function because I'm looking at sign-in logs. But my question is now, what applications and locations were accessed by this user on this date and time? Same function runs, same KQL query runs, but the OpenAI's ChatGPT is trying to answer that question with what applications were used, not a summary. So now it's going to basically just run the same KQL query, return the results, and then go ahead and bring this into the model.
Cool. Very cool.
And there we go. So now my answer is this person accessed the Azure portal, the Teams web client, and the Azure PowerShell. So I know immediately the 3 applications this person accessed on that day, as opposed to a detailed summary. And then we can get even more granular. Were this person's devices compliant? Now I'm asking for just look at all the sign-in logs and tell me if that person's device was marked as compliant on that day. So getting really, really more granular around this. Now, this logic app I'm showing you, someone asked, is it posted? This hasn't been posted, but once we release the new version of the Sentinel Triage Assistant, we will have these modules in here. There is actually a support for the KQL module in preview right now, where you can give it a KQL query and ask it to explain it exactly like I'm doing here. So very quickly, all of this will be available inside the Sentinel Triage Assistant natively, just a GPT module.
So Chris, somebody asked in the chat, is there any way you could use this to tell you what all of the cryptic error codes actually mean?
So using those things, I mean, it has to draw upon documentation. So if the documentation was prevalent when the model was finished, I think at the end of 2021, it's possible if you ask it what a Windows Event ID is, for sure, it will tell you what that is. If it knows about a certain error code, but to be clear, it's not reaching out to the internet and looking at documentation. So, yeah.
I was going to say, one of the things about, creating your own open AI resources is that it does take work. Like Rod, when you were doing the Rod bot, right, you have to upload all those KQL queries, you have to document all that stuff, which can seem daunting, but the thing to remember, like with what Chris has done, is, one or two people did all of that work and it took a bunch of time, but then how many people can take advantage of that documentation? Right. 10, 15, 20, 100.
So, and that brings up this question. So I hear this quite a bit, right? Because Security Copilot is still potentially a little ways off. And part of that question came through just a little bit earlier. AI Summit asked, if we work this out with Azure OpenAI resource to GPT-4, will the Security Operations Center even need Security Copilot? Is this your Security Copilot, or should they just wait?
Yeah, I mean, keep in mind that Security Copilot, the models are going to be trained on security data, right? They're custom designed models to assist in security operations. If you've ever asked ChatGPT to write you KQL, it's awful. It cannot get a table name for its life if its life depended on it. Whereas Security Copilot, they're actually training the model to generate KQL. They're generating a custom GPT module that will generate KQL based on proper schema, proper documentation. So you're not going to get that level of model training in a custom solution like that, unless you go train the model yourself, which is time consuming and expensive and those types of things. So Security Copilot will bring far better native integrated solutions than any custom solution can really provide.
When I think a piece of that, I think a piece of that is the TI that gets fed into that, right? So all of those trillions of, what are we up to now? 49 trillion, 39 trillion signals.
And, in the meantime, until Security Copilot, right now it's private preview, not even started yet. So in the meantime, and then even for, I work with state and local government customers. So we're looking at a year, 18 months for Security Copilot. So these are some things in the meantime that you can do to take advantage of.
Yeah, and look at all these new function calling features. Do we think Security Copilot day one will be able to call a playbook in Sentinel? I don't think so, right? So that could be another year out before really that powerful function calling feature is introduced. Can't say for certain, but there's so much coming so quickly. I'm just so fascinated by what we can do with these models. I mean, on a comedic note, if anyone's looked at some of the new stuff people have been doing with ChatGPT, I'm big into like Skyrim VR. Someone released an OpenAI built on Azure model where you can go communicate with the NPCs in Skyrim and it uses ChatGPT to respond.
No.
Wild use case. It's like someone posted a video yesterday of them asking them, do you know you're in a video game? And they'll actually respond like it's really comedic and funny. The ability for us to start using these in every facet of our lives. I mean, I'm just so interested to see where it's going to take us.
Well, and I think that's the important thing, right? When that question comes up, people ask about Security Copilot. Yeah, it's going to be available eventually, and it's going to be awesome. However, it's about what's possible. Kind of get into these AI models and figure out how this stuff works and start getting into yourself and do the learning. There's a lot of really good work that's going on around this, just like, the gaming and everything else. It's really easy to get into and start taking a look at this stuff and do some really powerful
And I'll say the customers who are in the Copilot preview right now, they're already doing this. There's customers who are actively using custom OpenAI solutions in Sentinel, and they're telling the PGs like, hey, we're doing this stuff already. We want Copilot to behave this way. So I think as the preview expands, if you've experienced all this and you can see how helpful it is, you're in a much better position to help guide the product teams and engineers. We're standing up user groups to get input from SOCs. If you've never used AI before in a SOC, how are you really going to tell them what you want to see, right?
Yeah.
Good call.
Now, do you have like a blog post, or maybe there's like a requirements list for all the stuff? Because I saw the Power Automate stuff. I saw a few other things.
Yeah.
Is there something
I
like
have
that?
2 fully detailed blog posts that we can post around SOCGPT that are out there today. I posted them on LinkedIn. We can provide a link to them afterwards.
Awesome.
But yeah, I have a full write-up on both of these. And as the V2 of the Sentinel Triage Assistant comes out, I saw some talking of other people looking to deploy. V2 has this GPT module in preview already. So, absolutely, you can go and take a look at it.
And we had one more question, I think super important, because we'd love to have you back. We're coming to the end here. I know we all have kind of hard stops, but what are you working on? What's your big vision here? Are you done?
No, I mean, getting this into stat, I think, is #1 priority. So getting it into the hands of everybody who uses the Sentinel Triage Assistant, getting it so it's very easy to just use these AI models in Sentinel out of the box with stat. I think that's where we really want to be. Then as these models develop, as new features come to these API calls, let's just keep integrating them. Function calling was just a month ago. I have no idea what's coming next. I mean, the announcements have just been one after the other. It's tough keeping up for sure.
That's cool. That's cool. Hey, super quick. Can you request export reports to Power BI or to a log analytics workspace to actually show graphic metrics based on anything that you're requesting here?
Like, what do you mean, like from an API call perspective?
Yeah, like can you like say, hey, by the way, can you pipe that? Can you give me a report on I don't know, all users that are affected by this particular type of alert, and can you break that down by country and then give me a graphical representation of that? You know.
Whoa.
Definitely, this is not Security Copilot, if that's what you're thinking,
okay.
right? So,
ask. Yeah,
right?
all right.
I mean, we can hard code, as I showed you, KQL queries to retrieve data and ask questions about that data, but it's no Security Copilot by any means.
Okay, copy though. I just didn't know how you figured that out, Chris. I'm sure I'll have that dialed in. So it's all good, buddy.
Yeah. Well, so okay, reporting's good.
Hey, CISOs like reports. That's all. But
they do.
Chris, a ton of great feedback and comments and questions in chat came up, and I know we couldn't get to everybody's question today, but we really appreciate the participation. And you can reach out to Chris. He's a friendly Canadian chap. I'm sure he'll be able to get to your questions. Check out his blog. We'll put that in the show notes. Man, this is just an action-packed hour. Just flew by. Tons of information. Agreed with Rod. You got to come back, Chris, internally or externally, and keep her going.
Awesome. It's great to have me. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. Thanks everyone for watching. Edward may be back next week. We'll just have to see. He may be like Brody and just leave us for a couple weeks, but who knows?
It's not you, it's me. Yeah, but thank you everyone. We really appreciate it. And Chris, good seeing you again, bud.
Awesome. You too. Thanks everyone.
All right. Talk to you soon. Goodbye.